Hello and welcome back to Red Brick Recap, episode 12, and welcome to our first ever live episode. And no better time to do it as we're celebrating a Miami win over Bowling Green to send them to their second straight MAC championship in Detroit a week from tomorrow. Ted, I know we both watched the game. What were your first gut reactions from watching that game?
Gut reaction is kind of gross. It didn't really start out super hot for either side. I mean, gut reaction. Your typical Maction game, really. It was kind of gross for a while. I mean, there was drop passes, a fumble that should have been a fumble, but it was turned over to an incomplete pass, then an interception, then a muffed or not even a muffed punt. It was a shanked punt. Um, so it was all over the place from just like a gameplay standpoint. And it's your typical kind of gross weather, cold, action type of football. But that's exactly what we live for and what we love.
Yeah, that's exactly what we kind of expected out of this game. I mean, they said it on when the broadcast opened. If you could just sum up this game in a word, it would be cold. Below freezing, wind was howling. I think that had a lot to do with the special teams play, both on the punt side and on the field goal side of things. But yeah, I think Miami did exactly what they needed to do to get the win. I mean, the X factor coming into this game was always going to be Harold Fannin Jr. We talked about him last week. He's going to be playing on Sundays at some point in his career. Excellent tight end, super athletic, huge threat down the field, huge threat in the short passing game, and really wasn't a factor today. I mean, 8 catches for 47 yards is pretty decent for a tight end, especially when they only had 200 yards through the air. But for a guy who was averaging 118 per game coming in and had 1,300 yards receiving on the year, to hold him to 8 catches for less than 50 yards with his long being a 14-yarder, that's as good as you can ask for out of that defense. And I think that kind of really limited what Bowling Green can do as soon as they took him out of the game.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, they tried to get him involved early on. I think I think his targets, he had maybe 12, 15 targets, and they couldn't find anything to get him going. And that was kind of our big worry last week is like, okay, who's going to be able to cover Finn, and what are they going to be able to do, or what is Miami's defense going to be able to slow down Finn and stop Finn? And they absolutely did whatever they had to do. Um, I don't think. I mean, realistically, I don't think Miami did anything different or did anything different than what they usually do in terms of defensive scheming. And maybe that's just the beauty of how good this defense is that it can look the same, but it's a completely different scheme or a completely different way they're gonna slow it down. But yeah, I mean, Fannin, 8 catches for 47 yards, less than 50 yards, which I think is like the first or second time all this season that he's had less than 50 yards receiving. He had 2 yards or 6 yards rushing, fun fact.
Yeah.
And he had 9 yards passing.
I mean, they did everything they could to get him into the game. And they knew that without him going, there wasn't a whole lot that there was to be scared. The running game looked good. Terrion Stewart, you texted me, he scared us a little bit early on. He kind of slowed down. Jamal Johnson obviously broke one out for a big run. But outside of that, Bozelic didn't look great. I mean, if you don't get Fanning involved, then I mean, Malcolm Johnson Jr. is the only guy at the receiving side that I was really worried about because he looked really good, especially in the first half. But there was no one that really stuck out to me that scared me on, frankly, either side of the ball. And I was expecting a lot more out of that offense. And I was expecting a much tougher fight than what we got. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot about Harold Fannin Jr. all week. He's in contention for the best tight end in the nation, which he should win handedly. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think he's also in contention for the Bolitnikov, which is usually a receiver award. But I mean, Fannin has proved that he deserves to be in contention for all of the awards when it comes to receiving. He's just, I mean, like we've mentioned a bunch of times, he's been absolutely incredible, and we feel like he should have been more involved in this game. And overall, like a lot of our worries didn't really come to fruition. I mean, we talked about being worried about Terrion Stewart. Terrion Stewart, he averaged almost 3.5 yards a carry. Like he had 34 yards the entire game. Jamal Johnson, we said it was like a two-headed running back, only 36 yards rushing, and it's a testament to this Miami defense. I mean, holy moly! I mean, we rave about this defense every single week, but like just something about this is like, I mean, we were texting at the beginning of the game, being like, "Oh man, like this." Terry Stewart, I think he had like an 8 or 12 yard rush, and we texted each other. We're like, "Man, Terry Stewart, he kind of scares us a little bit." And
Yeah,
then just shut it down.
yeah, and I also want to talk about like the front line, the front seven, as we talked about all season, was once again just stellar. And I think that outside of those first couple drives where, what's his name, Stewart broke out for a couple of bigger runs, wasn't a whole lot of ground game. And I think that's a testament to guys like Salopek, who once again is playing for his second straight MAC championship. Corey Suttle had a monster game again, a sack, a TFL and a half, 2 solo tackles. Adam Trick and Brian Ugu. I feel like we talk about Adam Trick. I feel like I keep saying like, oh, he doesn't get his name talked about a lot, and I've talked about him like 4 weeks in a row now. And Brian Ugu again. Like, what more can we say about Brian Ugu? Another sack, another TFL. Actually, had a pass breakup today, which has to be one of his first of the season. So shout out to him for getting a pass breakup. And I mean, all over the field, you're looking at like I'm just looking through the box score right now. Like that's probably like 20 names with the tackle to their name. And going back to like we obviously the front seven's been a huge point of emphasis, but the secondary today I thought was excellent. And Chuck Martin said it after the last game in the press conference, how he said to his secondary, like, you guys are not good. Like you guys have to get better. You guys are letting up too many completions, too many easy catches. And they stepped up in a big way today. Like Rayon Strader, 2 more pass breakups. Silas Walters, 2 more pass breakups. Salopek had 1. Hondrew had 1. Ugu, as I just mentioned, had 1. That's 7 pass breakups in total. If let's say 4 of those turn into completions, suddenly Bazelik's looking at 30 for 40 passing. That's a 75% completion rate. That completely changes the game. And granted, he only averaged like 5 yards per throw, but it still completely changes the game if he's able to get some of these completions down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I could have said it better myself. I mean, you're just this defense. We rave about it every week. We talk about it every week. They have just been lights out, and this is what we said at the beginning of the year, right? Is like the defense is going to win them games. And there were a couple of possessions where Miami either went 3 and out, or they punted, or they 2 interceptions that could have proven to be costly, but the defense stepped up, stopped this Bowling Green offense. And look, I mean, Bowling Green was a good team. They were 7-4, just like us, 6-1. I mean, there's a reason that we were playing each other to go to the MAC championship. And it kind of reminds me of a couple years ago when it was Miami versus Kent State. Winner goes to the MAC championship, and Miami's defense lost them that game. And
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, they learn from their past mistakes. And a bunch of the guys on the team right now weren't on that team years ago. However, some of the core guys like Brett, Salopek, Ty Wise might have been a freshman that year. I mean, they were all a part of that team that lost that game. But now they come back and they say, okay, we may have lost that one, but this one we're not losing. A chance to go back and go back to back in the MAC, which I can't even remember the last time that happened. This team is just incredible, really.
Yeah, they are. I'm looking at it now on the NCAA page right now. They are. Miami is 9th in the country in yards per play right now.
Wow.
Like that is elite defense. That is, and Dane Allen in the Twitter chat just said it. Like this defense looks just as good as the Miami defense in 2010. You could make an argument that this is one of the best defenses that Miami's ever had. Because I mean, this is 2 straight years now where Miami has just been straight up dominant on defense. And like you're looking at some of the names that are around, like they're ahead of Oregon in yards per play on defense, who is the number 1 team in the country. They're ahead of Bama, Oklahoma. I said Auburn, they're not really that good, but Miami, like they're ahead of some elite teams in Division I. And obviously the competition may not be as good, but they're coming in and week out and performing. And even when you take away some of those early season games against like the Power Fours, against Notre Dame, and you take away the Northwestern game or even the Cincy game, that's probably even better. You might be looking at the top 5, and that's like the Texas, Ohio State, Notre Dame range. So like this is an elite defense. They are one of the best in the country. We knew that coming in. I think over the last 6 weeks, they've really proved it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that 2010 team that had just an incredible defense. I mean, they won the MAC championship that year, and even last year we had a really good defense, and they won the MAC championship that year. And since 2000, which was the last year that Marshall won a MAC championship because they had won 4 straight MAC championships from 97 to 2000. Since 2000, there's only been 2 repeat champions of the MAC, and that's Central Michigan in 2006 and 2007, and Northern Illinois in 2011 and 2012. So since 2000, Miami is looking to become the first team to go back to back in MAC championships. And I mean, they got a great shot. I mean, I know we're a little biased, but they got a great shot, and they proved it against Ohio, who absolutely just blew Ball State out of the water today. But they proved they can beat Ohio. But it is going to be interesting to see how Ohio comes back and responds. We'll get more into that a little bit later. But this was just it was a really kind of gritty win for Miami, which is something that we've become accustomed to just watching them over the last few years. And this year we kind of were like, this is weird. Like, they were scoring points in bunches, and we talked about it on the podcast. Like, we kind of became accustomed to the blowouts, and when Miami was back to their gritty, gross kind of ways, like we were kind of shocked almost.
Yeah, and but I want to talk more about this Bowling Green game before we get into the Ohio game. But really quickly, I think that Ohio game was probably the one that we played in October, was probably our best all-around game of the season. Like, that was definitely Brett's best game, 14 for 21, 3 touchdowns. Keon's probably coming out party as he went 16 for 112 for a tutter. Cade McDonald, 5 for 84. We'll talk about him in a second, but he was huge today too. Reggie Virgil had a touchdown. Javon Tracy had a touchdown. And the defense, like Salopek, once again, 10 tackles. Like, that was probably Miami's best game of the season, and definitely their most complete performance that we saw, especially at that stage of the season where it was before we kind of got on this win streak and got on that roll. Like, that was our second straight win in this now like 6-game win streak. So it's completely changed the season, and obviously it's 2 different points in the season, and obviously Ohio's going to make adjustments. But I think there's very few teams right now that I would say can beat Miami in the MAC, and Ohio could be one of them, but the way we played them the first time, I just don't see it.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I want to give Miami the benefit of the doubt. I want to give them, they already played them once. I mean, thank God we don't play them. This isn't the third time we're playing them this season, because it's hard to beat a team 3 times. Yeah, I mean, that's the an age-old saying. So at least the second time we're able to play them. But yeah, I mean, outside of the Ball State game, Ohio, and again, we'll get into this a little bit more, but Ohio hasn't necessarily looked the strongest. And then, I mean, against Miami, I don't know whether it was like they had a bad day or whatever, or Miami just was able to figure them out. But I mean, Miami handled them pretty easily.
Yeah. And obviously, like, they're a very good football team. They've showed it all season. One of the best, if not the best team that Miami played this season stat-wise. And we said it before the game, like, Parker Navarro showed how good he is today, leading that team to a victory. That's going to be a guy that knows this defense now, has seen us play, and has seen the adjustments we made against him, kind of shut him down, forced him out of the game. He's going to come back with a vengeance, because that game was probably Navarro's. I don't have his stats in front of me. That has to be one of Navarro's worst games of the season, was against us. So he's going to be coming out with a vengeance, looking to get payback against us. I mean, I don't know about you. Anytime we can play OU in a rivalry game with such high stakes it fires me up. Like, this is going to be a crazy, crazy game. That building is going to be rocking. I mean, I think we were both there last year for the Toledo game, and that building was rocking, and that wasn't even a rivalry game. We're talking about an age-old rivalry between OU and Miami that it has a lot of bad blood between the two schools. Obviously, Miami's kind of come out on top in recent years, but OU is going to be looking for a reason to get bragging rights over us, and it's going to be a tight game. I don't think it's going to be as convincing as it was in October. I think it's going to be a lot more close, but still, I mean, I'm fired up. I can't wait to see that game.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of shut my mouth about Ohio, because I pulled up Parker Navarro's stats, but Ohio has been absolutely dominant to end the season. I don't know what I was talking about. Ohio, they beat Buffalo 47-16. They then move on to Kent State 41-0. Eastern Michigan 35-10. Toledo 24-7. Remember, we lost to Toledo. And then Ball State 42-21. And Parker Navarro, I will say this, he has not thrown the ball more than 30 times once this season, and that was against Eastern Michigan. He threw it for 32 times, and then he threw the ball 30 times against Syracuse to open the season. But other than that, he's not thrown the ball more than 30 times. And if we want to talk about his rushing, I mean, in the last since the Miami game, 81 yards rushing, 41 yards, 106, 104, 110 today against Ball State.
Yeah.
I mean, what is he averaging? He's got 766 yards in the season. They've played 12 games. He's averaging about 63, almost 64 yards a game as the quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was Miami's weakness all year is like mobile dual threat quarterbacks. And yet in the game against them, less than 100 yards rushing, less than 100 yards passing, less than 100 yards or 50 yards rushing. I mean, that gives you hope if you're on the Miami side, but he's playing like a man possessed in these last 5 games after the Miami loss. I mean,
Yeah, he's playing out of his mind. And Anthony Tyus, too, who we talked about in the pregame of that game, who Miami, I believe, did a pretty good job of minimizing his effect as well. In the game, we held him to 8 rushes for 15 yards. That's about as good as you can do against a running back like him. Because on the season, he has 888 yards for 8 touchdowns, and that's in 10 games. That isn't even counting what he did today. And I'm looking at some of the games he's played, like against Syracuse, 16 rushes, 203 yards, 2 touchdowns. Toledo last week, 33 rushes, 125 and a touchdown. Like, that's a guy who, if you don't get him stopped early, that's a guy that can kill you in the backfield. And we've seen it in some of the games this season, obviously less so in recent weeks. We kind of figured out how to stop the run a little bit. But especially earlier in the season, like these are elite running backs. Like I go back to like Jeremiah Love or Corey Kiner or those guys that kind of can gashes for those big plays. If we don't swallow him up early and get him stuck in the backfield, then that can lead to a bunch of problems later on in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned, man, I'm sorry. I am like all over the place today.
It's all good. It's holidays.
But it's a dual-threaded monster that they have in that backfield because I'll draw back to Parker Navarro here for a second. Since the Miami loss, he's thrown for 5 touchdowns and what is that? He's thrown for 5 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He's got 7 touchdowns and 9 interceptions on the year. How many rushing touchdowns do you think he's had in that span? He's got 5 passing touchdowns.
7?
9.
Oh, okay.
9 rushing touchdowns. He had 4 against EMU. He had 2 against Ball State today, 2 against Toledo, and 1 against Kent State. None against Buffalo, though. But I guess that's when he had two passing touchdowns. But yeah. I mean, he clearly is not going to want to throw the ball because this is his 3rd straight game, 4 in the last 5, and then 6 in the last 6 games that he's had an interception. So clearly he's not going to want to throw the ball. Ball State is kind of the outlier here because Ball State is not having a great season this year. But they're going to want to run the ball. And I think Miami, as we've seen, their run defense has gotten better and better each week going in. And I think, if Miami can continue to have the success they're having with his rush defense, I mean, look at what they did to Terrion Arnold today. And Johnson in the backfield. I mean, they limited them both to less than 50 yards. It was only a combined, 70-something. So, if they can continue to have this stout running defense and force Navarro to throw the ball, they're going to do exactly what they did, in Oxford this year. Like, it's going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah, and like the front 7 again, like I keep talking about, it's like my favorite thing to talk about every week. But they showed why they've been so formidable this year. Like 4 sacks. Bazelak, I think he was hit 5 or 6 times for losses of 5 or 6 on pretty much every play. Like, that's how you limit a running quarterback. And obviously Bazelak doesn't run a ton, and Navarro's a little bit more mobile than him. But that's something to build on. Like, if you can keep a quarterback in the pocket like that, that's something you can build on going into this week. A couple more things I want to talk about from this Bowling Green game is I want to shout out the coaching staff and like the play calling today, because I thought that was something that I harped on a lot early in the season. I was probably banging the drum a little bit more than I should have about the play calling and how sometimes it was lackluster, we'll call it. But today I thought it was excellent. Like, especially when we needed plays to happen and needed big yardage, they dialed the right play. They called the right number and they made it happen. And I'm looking at this, like the box score today, and it's a lot more streamlined than it has been in previous weeks. A lot less people got involved on the offense, and the guys that did get involved often were the guys who have been consistently making plays all season. Like the receiving, 3 guys caught passes today. I'll let you guess who the 3 guys were.
If I had to guess, would it be Javon Tracy, Reggie Virgil, and Cade McDonald?
Bingo. Yeah, those are the 3 guys who have caught passes all season, and they continue to catch passes and continue to be a menace. All 3 of them pulled down a touchdown today. All 3 of them all 3 of them had more than 80. Javon had 3 catches for 90. Reggie had 6 for 82, and Cade had 9 for 82. Cade probably could have even had more. He probably could have had 2 touchdowns at that one if he didn't step out of the 6-yard line. But just excellent from the receiving game today. I mean, how often can we talk about Keon Mosey? I feel like we talk about him every week at this point. Once again, 108 yards, takes him over 1,000 for the season. Second straight year, Miami has this 1,000-yard rusher. I keep going back to like the early season. When we were in these like non-conference games, we said Miami needs a lead back. We have a lead back now, and look how that has completely changed how our offense runs.
Yeah, I mean, this is the second time. Oh my gosh, second time that we got a 1,000-yard running back. Oh my goodness gracious. I on the broadcast they said it was like the first time since like 2010. I think that happened. It's been a while since we've had two 1,000-yard running backs, and if you would have said at the end of last year we would have had 2 1,000-yard running backs, people would have been like, "Oh yeah, Rashad Amos, 2 back-to-back years." No, it's Keon Mosey, and then people would have been like, "Keon Mosey, the guy who's gotten like what, maybe 25 carries across his Miami career." He has he has been incredible. I mean, he has stepped up in a huge way, and I really liked how you mentioned that the players who got the ball today were the players that needed the ball. It wasn't like we're gonna throw a quick little check down to somebody that we don't usually throw the ball to. It was like a steady diet of Keon Mosey, Tracy Virgil, and McDonald. And Downing got in there in a couple times, and Davis got in there a couple times, and like they didn't really do too much, but Miami made a point today to get the ball to their guys, and I mean, look what happened. Get the ball to their guys, and then boom.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm going to shout out Tim Daniel. Thanks for joining us in the chat. We're just coming up on 50 viewers now, so thank you for everyone watching along with us and celebrating the Red Hawk win with us. Another huge performance from them. Yeah, I think we've kind of covered everything. Like Mosey was great. The receiving core was great. Everyone on defense continues to make plays. Like we can sit here and gush about the Red Hawks all we want, but at the end of the day, they're still 2 wins away from a 10-win season, 1 win away from a conference title, and we're still waiting to see what that bowl game is going to look like and who we're going to face. Ted, before we jump in to talk about a little bit of men's basketball, I want to do a quick regular season roundup here for Miami football. I want you to give me, I have the list in our notes here, but we have a bunch of little regular season awards we're going to hand out for Miami football as we come to the end of the regular season. Obviously 8-4 overall, 7-1 in the conference. I don't know about you, when we were sitting here kind of at the end of September, looking at a 1-4 record, 1-3 in non-conference, coming off the loss against Toledo, who we'd beaten in the MAC championship the year before, I didn't see an 8-4 season coming. I was fully expecting like a 6-6, sneak into a bowl game, and then be happy with that. 8-4 and 7-1 in the conference was the best case scenario at that point, and it just shows how impressive it's been for this team to step up and perform the way they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were kind of throwing a funeral for Miami football after the Toledo loss. I mean, we were 1-4 at that point. I mean, and it's not like they it's not like they looked good against UMass the week before. So we were kind of throwing in the towel a little bit, saying like, all right, well, if they don't win, then season's over. And then it was like, okay, they got 1 win. It's like, all right, well, they extend their season a little bit more. And then there was another win, and another, and another, and now they're back in the MAC championship. And I mean, the best thing about this season is that they've controlled their own destiny, and I think that's a really big thing. Is like they didn't have to have anybody help them out. Like they didn't have to have like I mean poor Buffalo. They needed like 8 different scenarios to happen to like have a chance of winning or of getting to the MAC championship, and obviously that didn't happen. But it was definitely really nice to have have their own destiny for sure.
All right, well, let's start off with the offensive MVP for the 2024 regular season. I know mine. I think we're going to probably have similar answers here, but I'm assuming you're going to go with one of the players I'm thinking of. So I'm going to go with Reggie Virgil.
Okay. Okay.
I'm saying Reggie Virgil. I obviously like there are some other names here. There's a lot of nominees we could have gone with, but I think when Virgil, like especially over the last 7 games, I think he's had a touchdown in each of the last 7 games. I think it's 8 in the last 7. That has completely changed that offense. Like obviously the running game's been great. We know all about that. But if you don't have consistent receivers to throw the ball to, there's no point in establishing the run game because the pass game's not going to work either. And I think Reggie Virgil's kind of consistency, I'm not going to say dominance because he hasn't exactly been like a super dominant, like over the top receiver like we've had in some previous years, but he's been super consistent. You get the ball to his 2 hands, 99% of the time he's going to come down with the catch. And even on some of those 50-50 balls, we saw it against Kent State. He made some excellent plays down the stretch. We saw it against NIU making some excellent plays. That completely changed the way the offense has gone. Looking at the end of the season stats, I think he's going to end with around 850 yards with 10 touchdowns, I want to say, in that ballpark. That's pretty elite from a MAC receiver. I'm very happy with that production, and I think it's completely changed the way that Chuck Martin's run his offense.
Yeah, I like that pick. I have a different pick, but I do like that pick. I mean, Reggie Virgil has been absolutely steady hand. I mean, call him steady hand Virgil. I mean, he's been great. But I think where my pick changes is one of the things that they said on the broadcast today is like, Miami doesn't have a go-to guy. They have 3 go-to guys. So for me, trying to pick one of them is like, picking your 1A, your 1A, your 1C, right? Or
Right.
your 1A, your 1B, your 1C. Like they all are that at that receiver. So I'd say honorable mention to the 3-headed monster receiving core. Honorable mention to the offensive line. After those first couple of weeks where they looked really shaky, they have stepped it up. I mean, they have not really played a bad game. I mean, they've had some like okay games, but they have not played a bad game since the beginning of the season. So honorable mention to the offensive line, but you got to give it to the man behind them. Keon Mosey is my offensive MVP. Last season, he only had 34 carries for 151 yards. This season, he's got over 100 carries for over 1,000 yards, and he matches his career high in rushing touchdowns. And I mean, he had 108 rushing yards on 18 attempts today. He's over 150 carries for over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. He had his career high longest of 74, a 74-yard rush. To me, it just feels like, we were so down on them losing Kenny Tracy at the beginning of the season. Like, oh man, like we lost Kenny Tracy. There goes our starting running back. What are we going to do? And Keon Mosey just took the ball literally and figuratively and ran with it. So I mean, for me, I think my offensive MVP has to be Keon Mosey. I don't think it can be anyone else, and that's no disrespect to anyone else. This was just an incredible season overall. But I mean, Mosey averaged almost 6.5 yards a carry. I mean, that's huge. That's huge for an offense, and that allows the offense to get the tri-headed monster involved. And it just, to me, it feels like Keon kind of had this out of nowhere breakout year.
Yeah, well, that could be another award coming up here in a second, but let's switch gears and go to defensive MVP. I mean, there could be like 5 on defense. Like there are so many guys that you could go with on the defense for the MVP this season. Obviously, we could talk about Salopek and the fact that he's back as the captain of this defense. You could talk about Ty Wise. He was awesome today. I'm going to go with Brian Ugu. I think he completely stepped up this year, completely one-upped his game. And, I mean, the stats speak for themselves. He's got 14 TFLs, 7.5 sacks, 14 QB hits, 2 fumble recoveries, especially in those, like, first 4 or 5 weeks of MAC play. It felt like we were talking about him every week with a big play or a big sack. And once again, he got involved in the NIU game with a massive play. So there are like 5 or 6 names you could go with on defense, and you could probably make a case for any of them. But for me, it's an obvious choice, and that's Brian Ugu.
This is so difficult for me because it's kind of like, I guess we'll separate this into a different award. I know we don't have it on our sheet, but I'll add it right now. I'll add Unsung Hero Award.
Yeah.
we'll add that. So unsung hero award. But if I had to choose someone, if I had to choose someone, I'll take the cop out answer and I'll choose Matt Solopek. That defense does not run without Matt Solopek. I mean, he's exactly what you want in a linebacker. He's a true field general. He is making sure everyone's in position, and he's making tackles. I mean, first player in program history to have 4 straight seasons of 100+ tackles. I mean, that doesn't happen to just anybody, and it shows just true grit, determination, hard work, whatever you want to say about Matt Solopek. And he, you know, it's gonna suck when he's gone next year. I mean, it's gonna stink. So, but I mean, for me, I'm choosing a cop out answer because I don't want it because I the reason I add my unsung hero award is because when we get into that, it'll make more sense. But I didn't want to use my unsung hero as an MVP because I just think that there's a reason they're unsung. They're not, they're not a true MVP. But I mean, you really cannot go wrong with anybody on this defense.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a couple more honorable mentions here I want to bring up. Actually, I'll save them because they might come up in the other awards. So I'll save their names for a second. But let's go to the breakout player. This can be offense or defense. Obviously, you mentioned Mosey, so that's an obvious breakout pick. But for me, there's one on the defensive end that I think is an obvious pick for me. Rayon Strader. I am so scared that a Power 4 school is going to see him dominate and like lock down one side of the field and decide they need him in their secondary, because they'd be absolutely right. He's a machine out there. And I mentioned it a second ago how the secondary wasn't great earlier in the season and how it really needed to step up. And Strader's been a huge part of that. I mean, once again, the stats speak for themselves. 38 tackles, 2 picks. He's got 3 in his career, a couple huge ones. And like, people don't throw to Strader anymore because their receivers don't get open. It's impossible to throw to Strader's side of the field. I think he's become like the captain of that secondary unit a little bit. And I think that's kind of a big reason for this unit's success in the second half of the season. So Strader's my breakout player of the year. If he stays at Miami, he's only going to get better. If he goes to a Power 4 school, he's probably also going to only get better. But I mean, the sky is the limit for that guy right now.
I have two. I have two breakout players on the defensive side, and I know I'm kind of cheating because I'm choosing two, but I really can't choose. I really can't choose between the two. The first one I'll talk about is Adam Trick, which has been your guy in these last couple of weeks. He's been on another level these last couple of weeks, really. I mean,
Yeah.
last season only recorded 7 tackles. This season, 27. He's going to be the Matt Solopek replacement, and I love how they're playing him with Matt Solopek this year to see how he does, how he conducts himself and how he runs himself, and Trick has kind of stepped in and really been a nice compliment to Solopek, and I think next year he's going to have a really big year, or I hope he has a really big year. He's only a sophomore too. He's young, so you get 2 more years of Adam Trick. That's always a nice accomplishment. Not accomplishment, a nice thing to have. And then my second one is he's a senior and he transferred in this year, so I don't know if he has 1 more year of eligibility or not, but it's Savio Frazier. Savio. I really like Savio. His stats don't jump out on paper. He only has, I think, 17 total tackles this season. So they don't jump out on paper. 17 tackles, 1.5 sacks, but he does the things that aren't necessarily shown on the stat sheet. He's forcing runs outside. He's really complimenting Nasir Washington. I mean, I can even say Nasir Washington as well, but just the interior defensive line of those two has been incredible. So, I mean, I'll give it to those two. Those two have really stepped up and really made a formidable interior line. And Savio Frazier has 2 pass defenders, I think. It says PD, which seems odd, but I guess it makes sense because it's right after the interception. So he has 2 passes defended this year. So shout out Savio.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think both of those picks are absolutely correct. I mean, some offensive names we could go with here. I mean, not as many. I think there's some names that like maybe look for a bigger role next season. We kind of talk about like how some of the guys like Virgil, Tracy, McDonald kind of already had their roles kind of come in. But kind of down the stretch, I think Cam Perry's going to have a big role next year.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say him too, yeah.
Like 100 yards. Andre Johnson, I think, is done eligibility-wise. But, I mean, Cole Weaver saw the field. That's a guy that can probably step in for Virgil when he graduates, when Johnson's graduating. And obviously, Javon Tracy is going to be the guy on that offense moving forward, assuming he sticks around. So, but there are some names that we didn't talk about on the offense that I want to make sure get mentioned as well. I'll let you start with your unsung hero award because it's your award. I don't want to jump you here.
The defensive backs, all of them, safeties included. Let's talk about it for a second. First of all, I mean, we know Ryan Strader was going to be good. He was a MAC freshman, all defensive team. I don't think he was the defensive freshman of the year. He might have been. I cannot remember.
I think he was.
But regardless, we knew he was going to be good coming in. And there's a reason that we're talking about him saying, please do not pull a John Saunders Jr. and go to a P4 school. As much as we would love to see you succeed, we want you here.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can just go around that the defensive unit, the defensive backs, and just pick out any name. And these are the guys that we coming into the season, we were worried about the defensive back unit outside of Strader. And you know who stepped up? Silas Walters, Eli Blakey, Luke Evans. All of those guys really stepped up and made it. I mean, Ande Caldwell too. I mean, he hasn't played a ton, but when he gets in there, he makes an impact. And for me at least, I feel like all of those guys really, when they're all moving as one unit and we're talking about them as a unit rather than individuals, to me, that makes way more of an impact than having just than just talking about Ryan Strader. We should be saying, Ryan Strader is the leader of this elite defensive back crew, which we are seeing in this season. And again, we haven't really talked about them a whole lot. And when we have, it's really been like Eli Blakey and Ryan Strader. But this whole unit deserves credit for this season.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to jump in with another whole unit and just do the entire special teams, like the kicking unit. I feel like that's kind of cheating, especially because Dom Jobin's not exactly unsung. He's a semifinalist for the Groza Award, which is now an award that runs through Oxford. Mark it down. The Groza runs through Oxford. But, I mean, we talk about Jobin a ton. He stepped up this year, and, 85% on kicks. Hasn't been called on a lot in the last couple of weeks, especially, and he's been forced into some tough weather games. I think back to that UMass game. That was by no means an easy game to kick field goals. The Kent State game was windy and rainy as all hell. So that was no fun to kick field goals. Tonight, today at Bowling Green, they couldn't kick to one side of the field because the wind was gusting the other way. You simply couldn't kick that way. So shout out to him. Huge season from him. I don't think we're as successful as we are if we don't have a successful kicking unit. And Alec Bevelheimer, again, not exactly unsung, got a lot of accolades last year, but close to 45% of his punts this season landed inside the 20. So you're winning the field goal game, or you're winning the field position game 40% of the time. I love that. And obviously, some of those punts maybe just can't reach the inside the 20, just depending on where he punts from. So I think that could have been even higher depending on the field position. But when you get those two kind of players who can, I won't say dominate, but are reliable in those aspects of the game, that completely changes how you game plan. It completely changes how you strategize for an opponent.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you joke about it. You joke about the Groza running through Oxford. Guess who's not a semifinalist? Graham Nicholson. And Nicholson had a great season. But he's not in Oxford anymore. So therefore, he is not in contention. And Jobin, like we've mentioned, he's that's what I think I like about the MAC a little bit more is when some of these big teams play, you don't really see really bad weather conditions.
Yeah.
And, I mean, sometimes because it's some of these teams got domes or whatever it may be, they're playing in neutral site locations. But it's Dom Jobin had to kick a game-winning field goal in the pouring rain. That's that's hard to do. And we saw the UMass kicker right before miss it because he slipped.
Yeah.
So, you're right. The whole special teams unit deserves a big shout out. And Alec Bevelheimer today was on another level. Holy moly.
Yeah, he was unreal today. Huge performance from everyone involved. Let's go to our next award, which is the game of the year. Ooh, I mean, we got a lot to pick from. I'm going to go ahead and go with the NIU game. I think
Mhm.
that's my game of the year. I think that was our most well-rounded performance. Maybe not our most dominant, but every aspect of the game played well. Obviously, it's not the greatest stat line looking across the board, but it was probably our toughest home test this year outside of OU, and we stepped up and put together a really impressive win. So I'm going to go with the NIU game. The Reggie Virgil had a great game. Javon Tracy with one of the throws of the year into that back corner of the end zone. Defense only holding a really good NIU offense to 9 points. All around team win. Really impressive. And probably without that game, we probably would not be sitting here talking about going back to Detroit. So I think that game kind of put us on pace to made it seem real that this was a possibility.
Yeah, that's a good pick. That's a good pick for sure because that was a game, that the game that we had to win to keep the hopes alive. The game of the year for me personally has got to be the Eastern Michigan game. It's the game that started the win streak, and not only that, but Eastern Michigan was, I think they were like 4-1 or 4-0 or something like that. They had a really good record coming into this game, and and then boom, right? Miami comes to their house on that disgusting gray field and whoops them 38-14. So for me, that was the thing that, kicked off the win streak. That it kicked off this run back to the MAC championship game. And obviously without that win, this whole thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's another great pick. That was my second pick. I ended up going with an NIU one just because of like how clutch it was in that point of the season. But yeah, I think that's another great pick. I'll let you start with your play of the year. I have to take a second to think about mine.
Play of the year, you just mentioned it. I can't go anything different than the trick play. Javon Tracy to Reggie Virgil. That is not a play that Chuck Martin dials up usually. You don't see him be flashy and run trick plays like that. So for him to pull that out in a must-win game against a really tough NIU team, and then for it to work to perfection, I mean, come on. So for me, that's the play of the year.
I completely agree. I think it's a great pick. I'm going to go with, we talked about it again. I'm going to go with Jobin's game winner against UMass. I think that without that game, none of this happens. If we fall to 0-4 to start the season, I'd be throwing my hands up like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we talking about? But I think that game kind of reinvigorated some life into that locker room and kind of gave them the push they needed to get back in the practice field and get back in locked in. And I think it worked out. I think sitting here 10 weeks later, I think we're pretty happy with how that turned out. So yeah, I think that's all of our awards for the team this season. Congratulations to all of our award winners. And we'll go swiftly onto our bowl game projections. We'll make this pretty quick because we have to talk about a lot of some other stuff here before we get out of here. But Ted, I've been looking around. I'm seeing some very different bowl games than we've seen in the past. I don't know what you're seeing, but what are you thinking right now?
Realistically, I think it's probably going to be something like the Boca Raton Bowl or the Cure Bowl again, something like that. One of those early games, maybe even like the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl.
Yeah,
I think they don't. They're not going to give a MAC team anything. Realistically, they're not really going to give them anything after like December. They're not really going to give them anything after Christmas. I don't think. Maybe on that like December 26th.
yeah.
Even that's kind of stretching it. But obviously, the Dream Bowl is the Pop-Tarts Bowl.
Oh God, give us the Pop-Tart Bowl, please.
There were 3 Pop-Tarts this year.
That would be elite.
That's the Dream Bowl, but I think realistically it's going to be. It's so hard because it's like, oh, like how do you want, like how do we project this, like.
Right.
So I think it's going to be before it, which doesn't really help, but before December 26th. But would love to see a Pop-Tarts Bowl Miami.
So I'm seeing 2 or 3 different ones that I think are pretty interesting. So Sports Illustrated has it being us in the Potato Bowl in Idaho against San Jose State. I think that'd be a really interesting game and a really kind of cool venue in Boise. I wouldn't hate that as a one, but I think the one I'd really like is this Game Above Sports Bowl. Yeah, Game Above Sports Bowl. It'd be at Ford Field again. and it's Big Ten versus MAC. So CBS has it being Miami versus Michigan State at Ford Field, which would be a really fun environment. Sports Illustrated has it as Wisconsin versus Ohio, and ESPN has it as Ohio versus Michigan State or Miami of Ohio versus UConn.
UConn, woo!
So that would be fun. I would love to have 2 straight games in Detroit. Obviously, that would make travel a little bit easier for me to go try and cover the game. I really don't feel like going to Boise, Idaho on 26. That'd be kind of tough travel-wise. So let's hope and pray for Detroit. But either way, those are some fun. These are gonna be some fun matchups. There's a lot of like good like power forward teams that haven't had great years that we could probably put up a fight against. So that'll be fun to see whenever those get announced. But yeah, we've spent 45 minutes on football. Let's move swiftly on to talk about some other things real quick. I want to touch on some Miami news that's gone around over the last couple of weeks. First off, I said we're going to be done talking about football. We're not quite done. Avion Smith, Miami, Ohio legend, is in the transfer portal. He did 1 year at Alabama A&M. I think he was the 3rd string quarterback there. Didn't really get the playing time that we thought he was going to get, but he's back in the portal. I'm not going to be the one to say it, but there's
Avion, why don't you come back, bud? Come back.
There's a QB vacancy in Oxford, so familiarity is a real thing in college football. So I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it's definitely a storyline to keep an eye on as we move into the offseason.
MAC winning championship QB. Why don't come back for a 3rd or a 2nd?
I have no reason why not. I think that'd be a great move for Miami, especially from what we've seen out of our quarterbacks right now,
yeah.
or lack thereof. We haven't seen a ton. So familiarity, a guy who knows how to start games in the MAC, who has won the big game. I honestly would love that pickup, but we'll see what happens. It's very early in the transfer cycle. And I also want to shout out the women's basketball team here real quick. They've been on a bit of a break since we last did our pod, but the day the last pod came out, they destroyed Hiram College, 97-41. I want to shout out Camille Jackson for having a 27 and 9 rebound game. Just absolutely stellar performance from them. So shout out to the women's basketball team for a nice performance. They play Sunday against Western Kentucky, I believe.
Yeah, it was a really good game for them. I was there working that game. Every Red Hawk scored at least 2 points. I think that basically sums up how dominant they were in that game, and the best start since 2021. I think it's like one of the best starts ever. They're 4-1 to start the season, so hopefully they can continue to ride that momentum.
I completely agree. Well, let's talk about the men's basketball team here real quick. Brought home their first hardware of the season, winning in the Fort Myers tip-off in the Palms division, defeating Siena and Mercer on Monday and Tuesday. 2 really impressive wins. I know we were talking about it. I actually want to go on a little bit of a rant here first at the Fort Myers tip-off. You guys are a small basketball tournament who, in the Palms division at least, have 4 proud programs, but not exactly national names, right? So how do you decide that you want to get as many eyes on your tournament as humanly possible to promote your brand, to get people to come to your tournament and watch these teams? Put it behind a $30 paywall. Are you out of your mind? Who in their right mind is paying that? I'm sorry. Like I wanted to cover the games. I wanted to watch along. I don't have $30 to spend on 4 pretty average basketball games. No disrespect to any of the teams. This isn't Duke versus UNC, which I still wouldn't pay $30 a month for. So I don't understand what the premise was in trying to get people to pay $30 for your competition. I was blown away that was the price they set. I was frustrated. I know we were talking about it off camera, but that's just a dumb business decision. So shame on the Fort Myers tip-off for making it a $30 paywall to watch those games.
It's crazy because the beach division was on television. Like, I was at dinner on Monday night watching Virginia Tech play Michigan. Like you said, ridiculous. I mean, $30 for 1 month of access. And they're like, but look at all these cool amenities you get. And it's like, okay, I only need it for 2 days.
Yeah.
And I just wasted $30 on 28 days. And I mean, I didn't pay for it. I've just listened to it on the Miami Redhawks radio station, which shout out them for sending people down there and doing it. Cause I mean, that's how I was able to live tweet the game for Miami basketball. But yeah, I mean, that's stupid. I would have much rather watched the game instead of listened to the game, but that's neither here nor there. Miami was able to get the wins, but yeah, absolutely stupid.
All right, well, let's talk about the games before I, blow a gasket here thinking about it. Started off with a 70-58 win over Siena. Pretty solid win all around. The transfers, once again, proving that they're going to be a huge part of this team. Peter Suter and Cam Kraft combining for 36 points. And our guy, we're going to keep banging the drum about him, Ian Elmer, 15 more. You said it. He probably should have won the tournament MVP. Obviously, congratulations to Peter Suter, who did end up winning it. But, I mean, Ian Elmer gave him a run for his money. Like, once again, just put in another dominant performance. Antoine Woolfolk was once again good, 8 points, 9 rebounds. Those seem to be the focal points of this team, and they continue to prove why they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. No shade to Peter Suter. I know we are Ian Elmer's #1 fan club on this podcast. But Suter did have a really, really good tournament run. He proved to be, I mean, look, his counting stats are better. And intangibles aren't measured. So, momentum shots aren't measured either. But, Peter Suter had, all things considered, was really, really good. Led the team in scoring for the tournament. Ian Elmer got an all-tournament team, so, a little a consolation prize for sure. But yeah, I mean, everybody's starting to flow nicely. You can see the chemistry is starting to build with this team. The main thing that I want to harp on is the turnovers. God, it is infuriating to listen and watch sometimes. The amount of turnovers and the amount of stupid turnovers this team makes. And realistically, both the men's and the women's team needs to fix it come MAC play. And people may say I'm being a little harsh, but I mean, if sometimes it's just like you're throwing the ball out of bounds or you're trying to make a pass where there's a defender there. I get it, fitting the ball into tight windows, sure, but it's this combination of you can see it when they play sometimes. Is like if they're not 100% wanting to make that pass, don't make the pass, right? If you're not going to put it in there with the utmost confidence, don't put it in there at all, right? So it's something that I'm sure Coach Steele is harping on. I mean, from my conversations with him, just in general, turnovers is #1 issue, right? That's giving away a possession. That's giving away an opportunity for points. You'd rather miss the shot than not have an opportunity to take a shot at all.
Right.
So the turnovers need to get better, especially come MAC play when possessions are really at a premium.
Mm-hmm.
And the MAC is a conference about runs. Whoever makes the most amount of runs is going to win that game. And if you don't have the ball and you're turning the ball over and you're allowing the other team to get runs, you're not going to win the game. So that's kind of my little rant about the Fort Myers tip-off. Overall, really, really great job by the guys, though. They were able to steady the boats when water got tough, and they were able to hold on to a win against Mercer. The one thing that you mentioned in your recap, if you haven't read that recap by the one and only Jack Miller, go read it on riverfront.com. But the one thing that you mentioned was live and die by the three, and I think we saw it in this game in both games really, is if Miami's threes aren't hitting, then it's going to be a really tough time because they like to play outside-inside basketball. They like to play, if the three's working, they'll drive and they'll get it to Ant or whatever. But I mean, let's just look at this first game. They shot 33%, which is fine. But I mean, Ian Elmer 2 of 4, great. Cam Kraft 5 of 13. All right, Cam. We know Cam is gonna take a lot of shots. Other than that, he's 1 of 5. He was 1 of 5 on non-3-point attempts. That's something to note. Peter Suter was 1 of 3. Fine. Brant Byers being 1 of 8 was kind of shocking. Not because he can't hit them. Don't get me wrong. Brant Byers can hit those shots, but took the second most amount of 3-pointers on the team. He took the tied for the second most amount of shots on the team that game. I didn't realize he had the green light like that. But honestly, anything to get his confidence up, right? I mean, we've talked about it. Said sometimes he looks a little lost out there. So if you can get his confidence going, look, more power to it. And then Reese Potter was one of two. Reese Potter played some really, really good minutes, by the way. I was really impressed with him because he hasn't played in a really long time. But he played some really good minutes. And then if we go back to the Mercer game, Ant Wolfolk, 0 of 1. Elmer, 2 of 4 again. Ruined his perfect game, by the way.
Yeah, I mean,
Cam Kraft, 1 of 6. Cooper, 1 of 4. Hit a big time shot, though. He hit a really, really big shot. And he was 0 of 3. And he hit a really big shot, and that was huge. Peter Suter was 0 of 5. Potter, 0 of 1. Ipsaro, 0 of 2. Skaljak, 1 of 1. And Byers didn't attempt a shot in the second game. And
yeah.
they shot a 20% from behind the 3-point line. Like, this is ew.
Yeah, 11% in the second half from three is never going to be something to write home about. But one thing I do want to talk about from that game that I thought was really impressive was 16 for 18 from the free throw line. That was a point last year where I thought that Miami was leaving too many points on the board by shooting 65, 70% in some games where they were within a couple of possessions and leaving these points on the board at the free throw line. 2 missed free throws out of 18 shots. Again, not perfect. But that's a huge step up, and especially down the stretch when Mercer was trying to claw back into the game to hit those clutch free throws. I don't think they missed one down the stretch. And shout out Makai Cooper for hitting the 2 to put the game out of reach. But like that is going to be a huge focal point, especially in these MAC games that sometimes kind of come down to the wire. And we saw it last season where 3 games were decided by a shot with under a second left. Like these free throws, these late possessions, and these late free shots, essentially, these late free points are going to be the difference in some of these games. So they continue to hit these big free throws down the stretch. I think it's going to be a huge asset moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a quick shout out to Ant-Man, Wolf, whatever you want to call him, because he hit 2 really clutch free throws late in the game. They fouled him, and I remember the color announcer on the broadcast talking about, Ant's got to hit his shots. He's not doing super well from the free throw line, and he hit both straight cash, no rim, all net. Like, I mean, that's huge. And he's shooting. He's had again, really small sample size. He has 13. He has 13 attempts on the year, and he is 7 of 13. He's shooting 53%, which isn't great, but that number is sure to go up, and they're going to need it to go up if he's going to continue to be a force in the paint. And he's going to go up strong. He's going to get fouled. He's got to make his free throws. And Wolfolk in the last 2 games has really cut down on his fouls. First 3 games he had a minimum of 3 each, 3, 4, 3, 3. Last 2, 3 combined fouls. He's had 2 and 1. So hopefully he can keep that up because they are going to need him to be on the floor.
Yeah,
you need him on the floor. But he's been really impressive to start the season. He's averaging almost 10 points, almost 7 rebounds. That's nice. I mean, that's exactly what we need him to do too. So really impressive stuff from really everybody. The start of the season has been really impressive. 4-2 is nothing to shake your head at. And I mean, the 2 losses came to a team that you just can't seem to fight off those demons, and then Michigan.
Well, yeah, it doesn't get any easier though. Like we got Air Force on Monday. That's gonna be a tough game, and we're both gonna be in attendance for that, along with our boy Tim. So
I won't be there.
Oh, you're not? Oh, well, I'll be there.
I cannot be there, but yes, Tim is essentially going to take my place there.
I will be there. We'll have live tweets for that. We'll have live coverage from that. And huge announcement, we will have live coverage from the Indiana game at Assembly Hall in Bloomington on Friday night. That's going to be a weekend. I'm going to try and figure out how I'm going to go from Bloomington, Indiana to Detroit, Michigan in 12 hours to cover both the Indiana game and the MAC championship. So still working out the logistics of that one, but we'll see. We'll keep everyone posted with how we're going to cover both of those games. But at the very least, we will have some level of coverage for both of those games. But yeah,
I might be in attendance for the MAC championship. So if you can't get there, then I may be there, but obviously we will keep you guys posted.
Yeah,
But a note about the Air Force game. Air Force is 2-5. Okay, they're 2-5. They beat Mercyhurst, which is exactly how it sounds, and they barely survived Jacksonville State. They are competitive. I'll give them that. They've been very, very competitive. They play Wright State on Saturday, which will be a good test to see, kind of where they match up with Miami. But I just wanted to throw that out there because they could be 2-6 coming into the matchup against Miami.
Yeah, I mean that on paper that looks like a winnable game. Obviously, early in the season, a lot of results don't really fall the way that we think they are going to, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Indiana on Friday is going to be a great experience.
Oh my gosh, dude!
I can't wait for that. I mean,
14th ranked Indiana. Whew.
well, I'm not sure how long they're going to be 14th ranked after that Louisville game.
That's true.
So they're kind of licking their wounds a little bit after a tough trip to the Bahamas. So we'll see how they come back and play at home. But we're right up on our time here, so we're going to get on out of here. Ted, any last words before we finish up?
Shout out Miami football for making us have something to talk about for the whole season instead of throwing you guys a funeral. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about a second straight MAC championship.
Yeah, keep an eye out for any coverage coming next week. We'll do a preview show for the MAC championship next Thursday. And we'll also do a recap of the Monday game against Air Force, along with the Sunday game for women's basketball against Western Kentucky. And then we'll preview the Indiana game on Friday and obviously the MAC championship game against OU on Saturday. We'll see you all next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. In the meantime, have a good weekend and happy holidays.